So, if you've been following me for a hot minute, you will know that I have been going through this process with my own fantasy series where I am trying to kind of get a bare bones outline minimum of the entire series, start to finish. And that's been a whole process. You can go check out the previous videos about that if you're interested. But yeah, it's really fun, and I'm definitely making some really cool progress with it, and I'm very excited about it. That being said, one of the aspects of that is that some of the outlines I've been doing have been specifically just for each of the main characters because I'm writing for multiple POVs throughout the series. And so I'm kind of going through and writing bare bones outlines of their entire like character arcs. And as I've said before, I personally have a really hard time, like no matter how much fleshing out of a character I try to do before I start writing, I actually end up like once I actually start writing from their perspective, they just kind of become whoever they're going to be. And sometimes that works out really well. Other times I've noticed that I have this problem where like some of my characters that might have some things in common but are still very different. Sometimes they just sound too similar, like their voices, whether it's in dialogue or kind of like how they think about themselves or the world or whatever, it sounds too similar. And so I'm trying to figure out ways that I can differentiate that better and just kind of improve my own writing abilities with that. And so one of the things that I've been doing in this process as a little side project has been to write minimum 3 scenes, sometimes more if I feel like it, but minimum 3 different scenes for each of my main characters. That is like from earlier in their life than like from before the main story starts, right? That I do have the option of maybe using these as flashbacks or referencing them in dialogue or something in the novels if I want. But even if I don't specifically choose to do that, I feel like this is really, really helpful for me, at least, finding these different characters' voices, because of a few different things. The first one is it kind of gives me a better idea of who they are. It's like I'm getting to know a new friend or something, right? And I can write I can write a scene from their childhood that's actually like a happier, lighter kind of scene that maybe shows kind of their possible family relationships or their interests when they were children or like favorite hobbies or things like that. Some people might say stuff like that isn't that important. However, I do think things like that say a lot about a person. Or again, if it's like childhood things, we all still like have that inner child, right? That we like want to do those things that we always wanted to do when we were kids. We just like maybe have to like kind of reimagine it in a slightly different way as adults. I'm not going to fall down that rabbit hole right now, but I think you get what I'm saying, right? So I've been trying to write at least one scene that's like happier stuff like that. Maybe like really good, just really good childhood memory kind of scene. And then the other scenes that I have been trying to write have been more for the purpose of diving deeper into like their internal like emotional state, like who they are by the time the main story starts is going to very strongly depend on a couple of things, right? And I am not the first person to talk about this, I know, so if this is repetitive, forgive me. But I've heard a lot of authors talk about this, and that is figuring out 3 things about your character. And that is the purpose that I write these other scenes. So they can tend to be a little bit darker, but finding, first off, what is their biggest fear. And I don't mean just like they're afraid of heights. I mean like an emotional kind of fear, right? Like an internal, and this is something that they might also not be aware of themselves because it's like really hard for many people to self-analyze until something gets brought to their attention. And that's kind of the idea throughout your character's journey and in the story. The idea is that they will discover this fear and hopefully confront it or not be able to face it, depending on what kind of character arc you're going for. But that's part of the story for them, right? And so obviously fears like that tend to stem from some type of traumatic experience. And this, depending on what kind of story you're writing, it doesn't have to be something super extreme that's like gonna actually traumatize the reader while they're reading it, right? It may be, but it may be something that is fairly minor. It's just, it has to be something that, like, in whatever way affected them strong enough that it affects them still by the beginning of your story, like when they're an adult, or if you're writing a YA, like whatever. By the time the main story starts, that fear has been there for a long time, and to the point where they are probably not aware of it, as I said. So the next thing that I am trying to discover by writing out these previous scenes, these character backstory scenes, is what are their misbeliefs about the world, right? So we all have misbeliefs about the world. Again, sometimes we are not really aware of this. This is something else your character will probably, hopefully, be discovering during their character arc. At least if it's a main character. It isn't always necessary to go this in depth, I don't think, for side characters. But at least if it's a character we're getting their POV in, then we really should have a pretty good idea of what these things are, right? Even if they don't themselves. But you can find ways to show this in your writing by how they respond to situations or decisions that they make about things, etc. You know? So what are their misbeliefs about the world or about themselves, about how things work? And these are things that are gonna, this is something that's gonna get in their way. The same kind of way that their fear will get in their way, right? It's going to be how they make decisions, and they're going to make choices based off of something that is not accurate. And depending on what kind of story you're telling, this can look very different, can be very extreme. And the final thing is possibly the most important, that will definitely tell you a lot about the character, is if you can find out what is their heart's desire. And sometimes they might not necessarily even, they might think that they want one thing because of their misbeliefs or their fears, their traumas getting in the way and clouding their vision, right? So that's something to take into consideration. Maybe what their heart's desire is very different at the start of the story, but by the time they go through their character arc and confront their fear and their misbelief, then they will have realized that that heart's desire has changed or was very different to begin with. And that is real. That is how things tend to work. That doesn't always have to be the case. Maybe their heart's desire is what it is the entire time, but because of their fears and misbeliefs, they go about trying to achieve that in all the wrong ways. And it's kind of up to you how you see your character, but that's some of the things that I'm kind of figuring out as I'm going through and writing these character backstories out, or rather these little scenes of their backstories out, is that like some of them it's one way, some it's the other, but like it's giving me this much clearer picture of who they are themselves, and it's definitely helping me to start distinguishing the differences between character voices. This might to some people seem like a waste of time, especially if you're already planning on writing a long story. I'm writing an entire series and it's epic fantasy, so it's probably going to be pretty long. But I don't feel like this is a waste of time. Again, I can potentially use some of these scenes in my future novels, but even if I don't, I think it's just like improving my writing. I don't think that there's any such thing as wasted writing, which took me a while to get to that point because I've always been one of those people that's like, I don't want to have to do it more than once. I want to do it right the first time, but that's just not how at least this particular art form is bound to work. It's just not. So if you liked this video, please like, share, subscribe, and please also comment below. Let me know, like, how do you get to know your characters? I've heard there's a lot of different writers go through a lot of different processes. I'm really curious. What is yours? Please let me know below. I'd love to chat about it, and I will see y'all very, very soon. Happy writing!